Appreciate it. All day long I've been trying to think of something funny to do to my students, and I have not yet come up with anything. But the day's not done yet. Welcome back from spring break. I am pleased to introduce our next speaker for the EvoS seminar series. Coming from the state of Rhode Island, University of Rhode Island, we have Holly Dunsworth, who is a biological anthropologist there. She's got a PhD in biological anthropology from Penn State, where she got that in 2006. She's done research on lots of different areas informed by evolutionary perspectives, including work in molecular and cell biology as a postdoc, along with lots of work on fossils of various primate species. She's gotten some great attention for her work, and she has a really nice blurb on her career that I'm going to read. It's a very impressive resume she has. Her research suggests that the nature of pregnancy and the sort of the extended nature of childhood in humans has more to do, and I guess the relatively altricial nature of human babies has more to do with the mother's metabolism than the size of the birth canal. And she talked about that extensively in our pre-talk, and she'll be talking about that here. It's a topic that has resonated with the media around the world. It has been covered in NPR, Smithsonian, Fox News, which we will admit, and Scientific American, Huffington Post, Yahoo News, International Business Times, Science Daily, Providence Journal, North County Times, and more than a dozen outlets in Spain, even more in Germany, Austria, and even China. And I don't want to jinx her, but the pre-talk she gave just a little bit ago was one of the best we've ever had. Please join me in welcoming Holly Dunsworth.
Oh, I'm on. Okay. Is that too loud? No. Okay, good. So I mean, you know now the whole punchline of the talk. Which is, well, we just skipped ahead, but it's the answer to this question. How hip is human life history? That's just a cute way of saying, does the human pelvis, the bipedally adapted human pelvis, influence life history? In particular, does it influence gestation length or pregnancy? And then when the timing of childbirth? And the answer, as Glenn said, is no. So what I'm about to walk you through and share with you actually probably won't sound very new to you. I just don't think that anyone had come together, had brought all these people together that I happen to know, and had asked this question of the current evidence. And the question is, does the obstetric dilemma hypothesis hold any weight? The obstetric dilemma hypothesis is the one that would use the bipedally adapted human pelvis to explain our gestation and pregnancy. So tearing it apart, really, like thinking about all the assumptions of the obstetric dilemma in pieces, and working with experts in anthropology in various places of anthropology, collecting various kinds of data and evidence that apply to testing these hypotheses. After all that's said and done, it doesn't look like the obstetrical dilemma has a leg to stand on. So that's the take home for this, but I want to walk you through it. And I first want to, before I do anything, thank those people who have collaborated with me on this. And that's Herman Poncer at Hunter College, Anna Warner at Harvard, Terry Deacon at Berkeley, and Peter Ellison at Harvard. And this is the paper that many of you at least knew about or read before our talk, prior to this talk. And what I'm mostly going to walk you through is about half of this paper, but also some of the societal and cultural implications, or maybe just anthropological, but to me I'm thinking bigger than that, of what comes from this. So the obstetrical dilemma, we have to define it. And it's kind of hard to define because it's useful in so many different ways. And that's because it ties together, it weaves together classic observations of human biology or human behavior. And those include We are encephalized. We have huge brains. Our postcranial skeleton, and maybe even our cranial skeleton, has metamorphosed for bipedalism, for walking and running upright, and especially the pelvis. We have sexually dimorphic pelvises. That means, and this is just some measures that I picked out of a huge data set that was published in 2008, showing you that women, or females, are absolutely larger than males. This is from the largest sample I could find with the mean and the smallest sample I could find with the mean. Females are absolutely larger than males in dimensions of the birth canal, not just relatively, absolutely. And the one that sticks out, it might be the only one where males are larger, is bi-iliac breadth. It is right here. And that's highly correlated to height. We know that males on average are taller than females, so you'd expect bi-iliac breadth, since it's correlated to height, to be the one that's absolutely larger in males. But otherwise, within the pelvis, the dimensions that are linked to the dimensions of the birth canal, which are the ones I list here, are larger in females. We have a tight fit at birth, a really tight fit at birth. And I'm having trouble with my laser. You can tell. I drew an exclamation point there. You can see. No laser necessary. There's a tight fit. And childbirth, assistance during childbirth is universal. And we experience a arguably unique rotational scheme, this pirouette, this twist between our head and our shoulders to get out the pelvic inlet and outlet when we're born. Not everyone does. I didn't. But they had to pull me out with forceps. And it's probably not a unique situation, as we'll see a little bit later, but as we start to be able to observe more and more non-human primate births, we're learning that they also can sometimes experience a twist before they are born as well. All right, so another observation that we're weaving together with our obstetric dilemma hypothesis is that women are slower walkers and runners than men. Still. And finally, that although primates as an order, as a mammalian order, are considered to be precocial, that is, they are born, this is a relative term, relatively able-bodied, and that they are farther along the mammalian spectrum towards horses and whales than other mammalian orders are. Within primates, humans are what we have termed, what Adolf Portman and others since have termed, humans are secondarily altricial. Because unlike other primates, we have similarities to what are altricial mammalian orders or species in those orders, like many rodents and carnivores. So, we have the obstetric dilemma hypothesis, and I'm going to outline it in terms of how it's used to explain gestation length, pregnancy, and then the altricial nature of human babies. Sometimes it's used just to explain the tight fit, but it's all part of this larger story of the pelvis influencing, the unique human pelvis influencing our life history in a unique way. So here we go. I'm going to give you the three main points of it as a way to deconstruct it and a way to test it. Human birth process is a complicated, difficult, and dangerous childbirth. It results from passing encephalized babies through a mother's bipedal pelvis. A larger birth canal that could accommodate a larger, more developed, less helpless, less altricial neonate would be detrimental to bipedalism. Because of these pelvic constraints, because of what your pelvis has, the shape or the narrowness that your pelvis has to be for bipedalism, human babies are born early or earlier than ideal, something like that, so they can escape in time. So that is one way to sum up the obstetric dilemma hypothesis, and maybe a way to break it down, and we're going to break it down in this way because we can look at the evidence in this way. when this hypothesis was first published, it really wasn't published as the obstetric dilemma hypothesis. It was mentioned by a few people like Washburn and Krogman in, am I flashing because of the YouTube video? Okay. Sometimes when I'm plugged into the internet, I see these ghost flashes. Is that happening? Oh, good. That's just in my brain. Oh, it is happening. Okay, that's because I got a YouTube queued up, and I don't know why it does that when I'm in PowerPoint, but it's what happens. Okay, sorry, back to the story. When this was first intimated in the literature, it was about 1950, and ever since then, the obstetrical dilemma has been a really strong hypothesis. I think most people have, if they've taken biology and talked about human biology, or they've taken anthropology or anatomy courses, they've heard something like this, even if they've never heard it called the obstetric dilemma hypothesis. And I think it was really well received even from the get-go, because no longer was difficult labor, difficult, dangerous labor, and what was added later by theologians and the original sin piled on to Genesis, the helpless, vulnerable babies, part of original sin. No longer was that Eve's fault, right? Now it was evolution's fault. So here is a modern take on it. This is a blurb from Melvin Conner's, well, I don't know if it's a blurb from his book, but he published an essay in the Chronicle when his book on childhood was published. And here's a little nice way to, sum it up. The first 3 months of life, which have aptly been called the fourth trimester, are a legacy of the necessary early expulsion of the human fetuses from the womb to avoid an even worse crunch than childbirth already is. Erect posture followed by brain expansion made this necessary. The result is a newborn not yet exactly asocial, but not yet responsive to social cues, and certainly in need of care. That's assuming that our babies are the way they are because of our bipedal pelvis. And it's no surprise to everybody, and this has been the human condition for as long as we know, right? This is part of the human condition. And to bring it up to speed, something you're more familiar with, it's still a big part of the human condition, even though that is not what many mothers experience, not even first-time mothers. But because they can, it is a big part of our human experience, the awfulness of childbirth. So we must explain it. We must explain it with evolution. Are we explaining it correctly? Is one of the questions you can ask yourself. Well, first you need to know, is it really something that's unique to us? Is it really so much worse to be in childbirth with a human rather than with a little chimp? Well, I'll let you decide for yourself. We're going to watch a chimp birth. Okay, I need sound. Definitely need sound. Okay. We didn't sound test this before we started. It should work. It's on. This is a zoo in Turkey.
Nej, si vidi lì, vlepes. Trava vide. Vlepes. Mi to travas, more.
When you can, make sure you check her face out.
Επειδή όμως είναι λίγο λάθος η στάση αυτή.
She's not really grimacing.
Έρχεται, έλα. Έλα. Τζένι, φύγει από εκεί. Το αντιμετωπίζει, Τζένι. Έλα, βγαίνει. Κάνε. Μπράβο. Έχει βγάλει το κεφάλι, τι φανέλα. Τι θα το κάνω. Έλα. Βγαίνει. Να το, βγαίνει. Ναι, από την αρχή πριν βγει. Ποιος θα πάει να δώσει ένα χείμα στην Τζέννη. Πήγαινε το στην πόρτα.
She's not really breathing that hard. Notice that too. I'm not saying it's pleasant, I'm just saying take note.
Να το κεφάλι. Μπράβο. Μπράβο, καλέ μου. Θα το έχω από την αρχή. Όχι, το πήγα από το πρωί που ήταν πολύ έτσι... Με την αρχή δεν πήγαινε καλά, μου λέει. Γέννησε, μόλις γέννησε. Όπως σε βίντεο όλο, πριν γέννησε. Όπως σε βίντεο όλο, πριν γέννησε.
That's another female with her, by the way. Oh! There's a longer version where you get to watch her interacting. Sorry about the graininess of it, but I think it got the point across. So, we should just stop there and celebrate. But the miracle of childbirth for chimpanzees, in this case, okay, it's an N of 1, and I'm sure for some mothers, for some human mothers, it could be that simple, that quick. People who are born in the back of taxi cabs, not sure. But that doesn't, it's unlikely that a human is going to have that kind of a time giving birth. So the difference is a lot to do with everything we've already talked about already. But we want to know if the timing of it has anything to do with everything we've talked about already. So bear with me. Never, ever, ever make a slide like this. But I thought it was important to include this because it's from an evolutionary medicine and health textbook. And it gives the state of the art of how we understand things, but at the same time, and it'll give you a synopsis of where we are so far in the story, but it'll also tell you how, without coming out and explicitly saying it, it is implying that the pelvis is uniquely influencing human gestation. With the origins of bipedalism in our ancestors 5 to 7 million years ago came alterations in the pattern of childbirth. Bipedalism placed even greater constraints on the birth process through alteration of the dimensions and shape of the pelvic entrance and exit. If efficiency at bipedal walking were the only constraint in the evolution of the human pelvis, it would not likely be the shape we see in modern as well as fossil humans. However, another constraint was imposed on the evolving human pelvis, and that was an upper limit on the size of the neonatal head that can pass through at birth. This put the birth process in direct opposition to selection for increased brain size in human evolution. Apparently, the only way for the opposing trends of reducing the size of the pelvic opening for bipedal efficiency and increasing the size of the brain to continue, so opposing antagonistic pressures, the only way to continue was for more and more brain development to occur after birth. The result is that human babies today are born with only 25% of their brain growth completed. This means that a lot of the motor systems necessary for independent function have not yet developed, so that the human infant is much more altricial, less developed, at birth and more dependent on others than are the infants of most monkey and ape species. So here we are. It's because of selection keeping our pelvis narrow for walking and running, and selection for getting our brains big as they can, that we have this dilemma, and that's the only reason that this brain growth, much of the brain growth happens outside of mother. Otherwise, it's implying that it would happen inside of mother. This is the obstetrical dilemma hypothesis. So that is to say that human gestation and pregnancy, or life history, but these specifics of it, is hip. All right, so if we walk through the obstetric dilemma, how does it hold up to current evidence? I hope you're all right. We're just going to give one a pass. That seems to be pretty obvious. Human birth is dangerous and difficult, at least difficult. And there is a tight fit, and we have bipedal pelvises. But the rest of the assumptions that follow from that need to be tested. That in and of itself is not enough. So let's look at whether a larger birth canal that could accommodate a larger, more developed neonate would be detrimental to bipedalism. And there are a few ways you can consider this. The first way you can think about are women who have wider hips, who have bigger birth canals and wider hips. Are they somehow compromised in terms of locomotion? So we can ask this question: is it because of their hips? Are women compromised or worse walkers and runners? If so, is it because of their wider hips? Well, this is just a smattering of the literature, or smattering is not the right word, but this is a look at the literature for evidence of to answer the question of whether wider pelvises are worse for locomotion. And so far, it does not look like, according to biomechanical studies, that wider pelvises are worse, that they are at all the reason why women are slower walkers and runners than men, implying that they're at their limit, right? And then if they got any wider to have a bigger baby that was more developed, then they just wouldn't be able to walk. But luckily, I collaborated with Anna Warner, who's using state-of-the-art methods to ask this question with live subjects on treadmills and then in an MRI, where she can look at their muscle size and their muscle attachments and the dimensions of their bones and correlate that to the movements that she records of them while they're walking and running on a treadmill or on a platform. And instead of the old static model, she uses a dynamic model. Let me tell you about the static model. The static model here, it looks pretty obvious, and it's been working for a long time. This is ground reaction force. This is your acetabulum, and here, and we measure this by acetabular breadth, and then we cut it in half, and that gives us this moment. And that goes into the equation to calculate how much work this hip abductor muscle is doing. And how much work that muscle is doing is how much work you're doing to walk or run. And if you have a bigger R, a bigger moment here, because you have a wider hip, you will do more work here. So that is why we have assumed for the longest time that wider pelvises are worse. But if you use a more dynamic model, and you allow for subtle variations in the way that people move their pelvis while they're walking, as Anna has recorded and others who use methods like her, you get variation in the R that you can't. So you get variation in the R that has nothing to do with how wide the hips are. You get a moment here, and you get forces here that are not connected necessarily to this distance here, to the size of the birth canal. Let me show you the negative results we got to publish. You hardly ever get to do this. So here's her subjects walking, and here are her subjects running. And this is this is half their biacetabular width. So this is using the old static model that you would just take this in half, and that would be your moment arm to calculate the work being done at the hip for every stride. And it does not predict the moment that she was able to actually calculate using her dynamic methods. So that static model doesn't work. So the biacetabular breadth with this model, as used to predict locomotor cost or locomotor efficiency, doesn't hold with a more dynamic model when you capture how people actually move, how they actually walk, how they actually run, and subtly move their hips when they do so. It's more evidence to support this building literature of evidence that wider pelvises aren't necessarily worse, or if they are, that it's not the wider pelvises that are contributing to the slower walking and running speeds on average of women compared to men. Another way to ask this question is to think about how, if you could keep your baby in longer, if you could gestate longer and give birth to it when it was more developed, say when it had more of its brain, say when it had the same relative amount of brain for body size that a chimpanzee newborn has, which would be gestating for 7 more months. So 9 plus 7 more months. And then you'd have a human baby that had the same relative brain size as a chimpanzee compared to mother's brain size, right? So if you were to give birth to 7 months later, how much bigger would your birth canal have to be? It's actually not that much bigger. If you model, and you can do this, you can model the head as a sphere and use an easy calculation of the equation for diameter of a sphere, if you know the volume. And you know the volume of a 7-month-old baby's brain is about 640 cc's. You can calculate the diameter of that brain would need to be about 12 centimeters. And that's only 3 more on average than like the so-called average of all human women. And 3 more centimeters is not unheard of in the range of variation we've already seen among women around the world. It's not a whole lot more. But for people who have given birth in here, I usually look at people's faces to see if I can kind of tell when I drop that 7 more months number on, because it sounds horrific to women who have been pregnant, because 7 more months just seems like impossible for their bodies. And we're going to talk about why just in a second. But first, I think I just want to go on a little tangent, this slide. I think it's possible that that sexual dimorphism in this case is a little bit of a red herring. That we could think about the sexual dimorphism in the human pelvis like this, which is that natural selection for successful childbirth drives the female morphology away from that of the male, which in many ways that it's considered to be like the ideal human form, and that the female is driven away from that by selection for childbirth, but that she's compromised in terms of locomotion as a trade-off. But you could also, I think it's just as fair to think about natural selection for successful childbirth maintaining female morphology, and that pressure is just absent in males. I think it's easy to think about, I think a lot of people who've been studying skeletons in the fossil record for a long time have been looking at the male form, I think partly because they outperform women in sports. They look at the male form as like the ideal, and deviations from that are somehow compromised. When the female pelvis, I'm not arguing that anybody should pick an ideal between the sexes, but the female pelvis is literally the gateway to the future. It's extinction or evolution through here. So it probably behooves us to think about things upside down for a little while longer until we work out how the sexual dimorphism really occurs, what's going on there, maybe what the genetic underpinnings are. So yeah, this kind of sums up maybe what we should, we should flip upside down our assumptions about the female pelvis. Instead of it being this compromise, maybe it's just a multitasker. And instead of the pelvis being the only reason, being the pelvis the reason that, the skeletal reason that women are slower walkers and runners than men, maybe it's got more to do with why men are also faster swimmers and better golfers. There are a lot of other sexually dimorphic contributors to our anatomies other than just the shape of the hips and the birth canal. Our physiologies. Size of our heart, size of our lungs, our muscles, strength, testosterone. So, something to think about. So, how can we think about this third part of the obstetric dilemma? Because of these pelvic constraints, human babies are born early or earlier than is ideal. So the question is, are human babies born early? This is really what got me onto this, because I wanted to know, do we have a shorter gestation? And the numbers are everywhere. We do not have a shorter gestation. It looks like it's the same length as for any ape. And in fact, when you compare us across primates, and I've only shown the great apes here, orangutans, gorillas, common chimps, and us, this is the regression for 21 species of primates across the order. This is how far we are above the regression. We have a longer than expected gestation for our body size for primates. All the apes do that I've listed here, but we have a longer one too, compared to gorillas and chimpanzees. So we don't have a short pregnancy. We have maybe a slightly longer one than you would predict for our body size. Why do we always use body size as an equalizer for all of this? It's got to do with metabolism. And the explanation that I'm going to give you as an alternative to to the pelvic constraint is a metabolic one. But when you can think about it two ways. You can think, is our gestation short, like quantitatively short? No. Is it qualitatively short somehow? Somehow, like, it's not ideal to birth a baby that early. You want to give it more. You want to invest more in your baby before you give birth to it. I'm anthropomorphizing pregnancy like crazy. But so you want to compare just humans and chimpanzees here. Chimps are gold and humans are blue. And this is when chimps are born, the C. Humans are born, the H. And then this E is where humans would be born if they had the equivalent relative brain size as a newborn chimp. Remember that we used to calculate how much bigger our pelvis would need to be? So from an infant's perspective, chimps are born with bigger brains than us. But from a mother's perspective, her body size, chimpanzees are born with smaller brains but have less to grow. We're born with slightly bigger brains, but we have more to grow. We have much more, either way, we have much more growth to achieve after birth than they do, and we're born with slightly bigger brains. And when you plot that out from that same sort of data, those same sorts of data, you can see that human brains, newborn brains are enormous, and human newborns in general are enormous. So we're not early, and we're not investing less than some undefined ideal. We are investing a lot. So it doesn't look like there's something, unless we're cutting ourselves short and we can invest more if only for the pelvis, that'd be a hard case to make, but that's the case that has to be made. And that's why when you look at all these data together, it looks like there's a metabolic constraint on pregnancy, like there is on a lot of things that go on with your body. And that's what this egg hypothesis, this alternative to the obstetric dilemma, is about. And we gave it a name, not to be gimmicky, but because it's easier to talk about. And I was advised by a mentor to name it something like this. Energetics of Gestation and Growth is what we came up with. I wanted to name it HAM. Humans are mammals. And then I thought, well, ham and egg is adorable. Who doesn't want to hear about ham and egg? And that just sounded really gimmicky and terrible, Dr. Susie. And so we just stuck to egg. But underneath it, ham. Okay, ham. We have good reason to believe that labor is initiated due to metabolic stress. The fetus gets so big, so costly, that it starts to starve, and it exudes cortisol, and that is detected by the mother, and it initiates this very complex cascade and feedback loop throughout the mother's body, and that initiates uterine contractions ultimately. That's going to be the cause of childbirth. We have good reason to believe that. So when you can map this out with published metabolic data, a lot of which has been collected, well, all of this that we report here has been collected using doubly labeled water, and it's a really nice way to measure energetic throughput and metabolic needs of people, and pardon me, I can't get this laser. There we go. If you plot the mother's increase in energetic throughput and her increase in basal metabolic rate throughout pregnancy, you get this line. And then if you plot the fetal energetic needs, you get this line, and then it looks like it's going to continue this way. I hope you agree. Here is where childbirth occurs, and you can hopefully see that if that growth trajectory continues, that is going to exceed this dotted line on this graph. That dotted line is about 2.1 times the basal metabolic rate, and that is what people at the present generally agree is the ceiling at which we can operate day to day for a sustained period of time. That's our maximum. And the fetus, if allowed to grow any more, come on laser, there we go, would cause the mother to outstrip that threshold, to exceed it. Instead, she remains underneath it. Even when she's lactating, she remains underneath it. And as she adds weaning foods, the newborn and the child can exceed it itself, as it's got very expensive growth to achieve. So the egg hypothesis is explaining gestation length according to a maternal metabolic constraint. That is as much as she can, that pregnancy is as long as she can grow that expensive tissue inside of her before she can no longer do it any longer. And it ends the pregnancy and it begins the next phase of life. Even when she's nursing, she is not exceeding that threshold. We have good evidence that this explains some of the variation in among humans in gestation length. The egg hypothesis is meant to be a species-level hypothesis. It's based on human data, and it's meant to be tested in other primates and hopefully other mammals. But it's supported by variation within our species that we know is metabolically based. So for example, mothers with low body fat composition and low metabolic rates have shorter gestation. Mothers living at high altitude, so where there is less oxygen for inspiration, for metabolism, can give birth earlier than counterparts at low altitude. In one instance, a mother gestated for, I believe, over 18 months. This was recorded, I think it's either the Lancet, or the New England Journal of Medicine. I have the reference if you want it. The fetus wasn't growing a brain. So the tissue, you would hypothesize that the tissue wasn't as expensive, and she was able to gestate it for 18 plus months without all of that expensive neurological tissue growing as well. If you increase maternal caloric intake, you can increase neonatal size. If you increase maternal caloric intake, you can decrease preterm births. But this is when I hear a lot of people saying, or I see it on their faces, that the tight fit is too much to ignore. It's too much of a coincidence to ignore. And maybe you could just then test the hypothesis that humans are really pushing it. And there must be some, explanation for why we really, really, really push it. It could be that gestation length across species is predicted by energy throughput, which varies across species, particularly among pregnant females. And if an egg prediction would be that all things being equal, which is hard to do, but all things being equal, the higher energy species will have tighter fits at birth, at partition. And maybe an obstetric dilemma-y prediction would be that just in humans, and we'd only find this really tight fit for this reason in humans for some reason, and that would imply that the pelvis was what was preventing any further growth. It could be that this egg explains gestation length in other species, because it could be that you have to get up to that limit where the fetus is stressed in order to induce labor. And somebody in here might know if that's true in another species or not. I don't. We'll just skip through that. All right, we'll skip through that. So we're short on time. Another way to imagine this, or to think about things, or to flip things upside down, is to think about the mammals that do not have bony birth canals. In mammals like whales and manatees, where they've lost legs in their evolutionary history and now they've got little bony plates, they do not have a bony birth canal. Are they keeping their kid until college? No. So this is a relatively old paper, but they use neonatal brain weight, litter size, that's like the mass that you're growing inside of you. No matter how many you have that much flesh growing inside of you. And then brain size advancement, which is like relative brain size compared to mothers. And what they found was that these things predicted gestation length really nicely, and that animals that don't have a bony birth canal were falling in line just like us. This was a long time ago, and the obstetric dilemma didn't take a hit at all. And when you look at this same sort of question with slightly updated data, because there have been a few data sets published since. If you look at cetaceans, at whales and dolphins, and if you look at manatees and dugongs here, and this would be the regression line across the orders, the mammalian orders that we put into this equation, the whales and dolphins fall even below it, below that prediction, and the manatees and dugongs fall above it. Now, this isn't meant to be published. We didn't have great sample sizes, but with an updated data set, we found a similar conclusion to Sacher and Staffelt, which is that when you look at, you don't find an exceedingly long gestation. Oh, what happened? You don't find an exceedingly long gestation in mammals without bony birth canals, as if when the limit is lifted, and that bony limit is lifted, they're not keeping it in forever. They're giving birth when you would predict. So, here's another way to visualize the difference between these hypotheses as we wrap up. Here's the obstetric dilemma. The pelvis is the constraint. This is the baby's head. Maybe next time I'll put a smiley face on it. And the egg hypothesis puts the constraint here instead, that there's a constraint on fetal size, or on the time that the amount of time that you can grow a fetus, and that the tight fit is a coincidence. There could be other reasons why, since the evidence does not suggest that it's a locomotor cost issue, there could be other mechanical reasons why selection is keeping the pelvis narrow. We can brainstorm about that after the talk. Don't let me forget. And what does this mean for paleoanthropology? Do we have any paleoanthropologists in here? So it's been done many times where people have found a fossil pelvis and they've measured the size of the birth canal and then they have said, well, the neonates are that size. Or gestation length is XYZ long. Or neonates are altricial. So can we do that any longer? Since we don't know the metabolism or the energetic throughput of these fossil hominins, it's going to be tricky, and it's going to be tricky. So I'm saying that I think all you can really do is you could estimate an upper limit on the size of a newborn, but you don't know it's necessarily that size just from the birth canal. You'd have to know something about the energetics of that species. That'd be tricky. And something that threw a monkey wrench in a lot of this was this new Australopithecus sediba find. That's what this pelvis is from. Those two beautiful skeletons from South Africa that are the newest darlings of the human fossil record. They're from about 2 million years ago. They have very small brains, but they have adaptations for birthing big brain babies. These features of their pelvis have been argued in the past to be for birthing bigger brain babies, but we now see them in a species, in its pelvis, in a species that's not encephalized. It doesn't have very big brains. That's why it was placed, that's one of the main reasons why it was placed in Australopithecus instead of Homo, one of the reasons. So this is indicating that we need to work out better what functional anatomy is for in our hominin fossil pelvis. Oh, here's the mama, who doesn't have a very big brain, but has the adaptations for birthing babies with big brains. We'll skip that. All right, so to sum up, increased pelvic dimensions are not detrimental to bipedalism, as far as we know now. Human gestation is not shortened. Maternal investment is not low. A significantly lengthened gestation is not feasible. We don't have evidence that human life history is uniquely influenced by the pelvis. So if we want to describe altriciality, human neonatal altriciality, remember it's vulnerable, defenseless dependence at birth, is better described as prolongation of fetal brain maturation and growth, irrespective of the time that it's born. So instead of default assuming that, human childbirth and altriciality, and also the length of gestation and pregnancy, is due to the antagonistic selection on bipedalism and encephalization. Instead of this mechanical dilemma, the evidence right now points more strongly towards a physiological constraint on the metabolism of mother and the growing fetus. And that's it. Let's brainstorm. Let's talk about this.
How do you generate data for gestation length of humans?
Oh, how do you, should I be mic'd in for this? How do you generate data for gestation length in humans?
Yeah, like how you do it.
People know a lot of people know when they get pregnant. They know. And then they can, modern humans, it's pretty easy, modern humans. How you know what's the right gestation length, that depends on, so you wanna, as if you can control this, you wanna grow the fetus long enough that its lungs are developed. So I think that's the definition of a real premature birth versus just a slightly early but healthy birth. You can beat your due date and it can be totally okay because your baby has fully formed lungs, but if you give birth a little bit earlier than that and it doesn't have fully formed lungs, you've got to be in the NICU and you've got to really watch things. But it's still an arbitrary, right? Your due date is still sort of an arbitrary, well, this is how it's supposed to be estimate. Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Great talk. I appreciate
Thank you.
coming here and doing it. I'm not in anthropology, but it seems to me that this is sort of a huge and challenging idea. Like you're essentially saying, here was the long-standing hypothesis for years and years, and you're providing evidence saying something totally different.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if that's being received within the field.
It seems okay. I mean, I think intuitively it makes a lot of sense. I think I certainly understand that we can't help but be biased towards the skeletal and fossil evidence because you can hold it in your hands and it's pretty powerful. And so the people who were thinking in these terms were driven by that sort of evidence. And it just needed to be tested, and it just hadn't been. And it needed to be tested in a really interdisciplinary way. And that's not easy. It's not easy to do. Not just because you need to be a good collaborator and know the right people and be a good teammate on this team science, but because you need time to do that. And a lot of people in my position feel pressured to put out small paper, and this took over 5 years to do with a lot of reading. I mean, I was trained on fossils. My dissertation was on fossil ape feet. And I did some ontogeny in that, which is kind of what led me into this. But this is different. And to have the time and to know that I could still, continue with my career, a lot of people don't get a chance to do that, or don't. The time was right to test this hypothesis with all the evidence. If I hadn't asked, somebody else would have. I think it just had to unfold this way. And I don't think people are. I think people are resisting flipping over and letting go because the tight fit is too much of a coincidence to ignore, right? But I like to say that, this is being taped, but I don't care. I like to say that, well, my finger fits really nicely into my nostril, and I'm not going to demonstrate, but that's not. I'm not trying to be glib, but it's not enough. It's only circumstantial until you can show that there is a good explanation for it. And I think the burden of proof is on the obstetric dilemma now. It could turn out to be the correct explanation, but it certainly has a longer way to go, I think, than the metabolic idea does.
Yeah. Is there like a connection between mothers who have like metabolic diseases like thyroid disorders and like the size of the fetus?
So the question is there a connection between mothers with known metabolic issues and a correlation between the size of their fetus? It's a great question, and I don't know the answer to that. Partly because there are so many metabolic issues. I mean, that's such an umbrella term. This is very much connected to preeclampsia, which is probably a lot to do with metabolic issues and inflammation. So there is a link there, and people are starting to think about this. Me a little bit, because I'm new to all of this. Fossil 8 feet. But to answer your question, I'm sure there are. I just don't know a lot about it, because that's a huge area of research. That is like, if you dive into there, you've got to really dig. But it's a great question. I saw a hand back there. Yes?
Is there a collective advantage to having a longer period of dependency once the infant is born? Because I thought that was part of what was involved in
It is.
There is. So
No, you're right. It's involved in the hypothesis. It's called the extrauterine spring. So when Adolf Portman coined the term secondary altriciality in the late 60s to describe us, and he didn't like the obstetric dilemma either. He didn't think that antagonistic selection was the reason we're born when we're born, but he thought we were born when we're born. He still thought we were born early, and he thought it was because we needed all of that extrauterine stimulation during that brain growth to properly develop language and locomotion. the only problem with that is there's nothing about what I've presented here that says that's not adaptive. The only problem is what I presented here is strong evidence to support that there is no longer gestation. So you'd have to change the metabolism of our species in order to be able to have an even longer gestation, or if there was a longer one, to shorten it as an adaptation for all that stimulation, for that extrauterine spring. So it seems like if that needs to be part of this, which it probably does, that you're born when you're born because your mom reached a limit, but then all of that extra time has been crucial for whatever it is that we do what we do for all of this. Yeah. Ken?
Do we have data on BMR for the grades?
Yes.
Are your offspring born at the same 2.1 times?
All right. We don't know. That's what I'd love to collect. That's my dream next project. To opportunistically, when there are pregnancies in zoos, to be able to collect periodically through a pregnancy the changing metabolic landscape, and then post-pregnancy, lactating, and then post-pregnancy on the newborn too. We have data for the grade 8s who aren't pregnant and aren't lactating. And the only one that's been published so far, and I wasn't involved in this one, is the orangutans, but the ones I'm involved with, the chimpanzees and the gorillas that are in review right now with the same group, with Herman Poncer and a group of, he's the PI, he's an energetics guru, and the rest of us who help him collect the data. But his paper on orangutans showed that they have, here are humans, and you're wondering what the circles and triangles are. The open circle and the open triangle represent, here we go. Open circle and open triangle, orangutan adults. And then with humans, it's the same. Okay, circles are subsistence agriculturalists, and then triangles are, I guess, cubicle denizens. I'm not sure, but those are who are in the sample. So we've got sedentary and non-sedentary people, and we've got orangutans. They're captive, but we've got males and females here. Males and females here. And orangutans are using less energy per day than humans, and this was a surprise. A little bit of a surprise. But in general, humans and orangutans fall below on this prediction line from across mammals. So that's something to think about. We have long life histories. We have long lifespans. And when the paper with the gorillas and the chimpanzees comes out and puts this in a bigger context, I'll send it to you guys as follow up on this. But the real need is the pregnancy and the lactation, to know if there's somehow a similar threshold that they're reaching. Even though they have so much more room, they have such smaller newborns than we do, compared to our body size, compared to our birth canal size. Yes?
So why do chimpanzees have larger brains than humans? Or why are they born with larger brains than humans?
So chimpanzees are born with smaller brains than human newborns. But relative to their mother's brain size, they have bigger brains. They're born closer to mom's brain size. When you're born, you have much more to go to reach your mom's brain size, which is your size. So relative to mom's brain size, we have smaller brains. Relative to mom's body size, though, we have big brains when we're born. She's growing a bigger brain in her relative to her body size than a chimp mom is growing in hers. So if you can think about it two ways, per mom's body size or per mom's brain size. And we have a lot more to grow in the brain. But we come out brainy, we come out fat for an ape. We make brainy, fat baby apes. Is that a good final sentence? Or do you guys want to brainstorm more about why you would have a narrow pelvis if it wasn't to walk or run? Anybody have any ideas? Is selection keeping our pelvis narrow? Has anybody ever tore their ACL? Me too. Did you have surgery? Yeah. Me too. Anybody have foot problems? A lot of people. Anybody know anybody, you don't have to say who it is, who's had pelvic prolapse? So there could be other mechanical or even soft tissue mechanical issues if you have a wide pelvis. With the pelvic floor, I mean, it is holding you up, right? So there could be other things. Although humans are not the only ones that suffer from pelvic prolapse. All you have to do is read a veterinary textbook to find out how bad it is for goats and cows, too. And they're quadrupeds.
I think we have time for one more question.
Great. One more question? Yes.
What follow-up are you hoping if people are trying to vote this year, new hypothesis coming out? Like, what do you want to be tested?
Oh, that's a great question. Like I said, I'd love to know about the energetics of pregnancy in great apes, but also in any mammals. In any mammals. It's just, it'd be fun to start first with the great apes. What else? I would love to know how this way of thinking could, and this whole idea of reaching a metabolic threshold could aid our understanding of premature births and preeclampsia and stuff like that. But I also want to just get this out there. I don't like to call it my hypothesis because, I just, the evidence should speak for itself. It's science, it's for science. And, that's why it's not so-and-so's obstetrical dilemma hypothesis, because it's too easy to then try to prove a person wrong than to falsify an idea to get closer to the truth, which is what everybody should want. So we're all in this for the truth. So I really try not to say our hypothesis. I try to say we offer this idea. I tried to in the talk and I probably botched it, but I'd rather think of it that way. It exists on its own to be tested and to be shot down and to be just annihilated, right? And then we're closer to the truth, if it is, or if it isn't.
And we've got reception in CFB 110.